if I could give advice to people is really, it's a mantra that we have around here. It's inspect what you would expect. Um, Always look to see if you're expecting certain results, make sure that's what you're actually getting. And don't go by just the word of, somebody saying, "Yep, that's all set." Yep. No. Find a way to build the check and balance into the process. So you're just getting an exception flag, however methodology that works for you to say, there's supply chain, it's so dynamic and it changes every 20 seconds. You need something that you build out. Building out control towers is really, you don't need some fancy software to do that. You can figure out a way to know that here's the 5 things that are the most critical that I need to check every single day. And these are my barometers. And if any of these start kind of flagging, then I know I got to start digging into that segment of what I'm managing.
This is Facility Rockstars, the podcast that celebrates the unsung heroes of our daily lives, facility professionals. I'm your host, Jay Culbert. Join me as we honor these great leaders, sharing stories, insights, and expertise that empower us all to learn and grow together. Facility Rockstars is sponsored by Coludus, operating the way you operate in order to make your life easier.
Welcome back to Facility Rockstars. I'm your host, Jay Culbert. Get ready for some energy today because today's guest is truly dynamic. She is someone who truly sees the world through numbers, strategy, and curiosity, a natural problem solver. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Her path is a great example of how following your instincts, even when it means changing direction, can lead to something that fits just right. She's a supply chain strategist, a data-driven leader, and a mentor dedicated to helping others grow. She's loved numbers for as long as she can remember, even as a kid dreaming of being an accountant with a calculator in hand. But after a finance internship in college, she realized she needed something more dynamic. That's when she found operations management, and everything clicked. From managing manufacturing operations to tackling supply chain challenges, she's used data to improve processes and drive results, always asking why and how can we make this better? She currently serves as the Senior Director of Procurement at Blount Fine Foods. Katie Huard, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jay.
How
Excited to
are
be
you?
here. Good, good.
Thank you for investing your time with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So Katie, I'm going to ask you what I ask every guest, and that is especially with the pivots you've had in your career, right? What's been your biggest lesson learned?
My biggest lesson learned, honestly, is stay inquisitive. Always ask why. Always ask, why are we doing it this way? Why is this process a certain way? I've learned so much about end-to-end business just from asking questions. You really have to get a good business acumen for your company, companies you're adjacent to, and make those decisions along the way. And you really can't do that by just sitting behind a computer and checking off tasks on a list. You really have to poke the bear and ask the questions that need to be asked, even if they're super uncomfortable.
So where did you learn that skill or how did you develop it?
It's really, I think, just naturally, I've always been a nerd. I'm a self-proclaimed nerd. I love to just learn. I have so much useless trivia knowledge. And once I realized I could channel that inquisitiveness to something that was productive, it's really kind of just been my, you know, tool in the toolbox that I use most often. Um, Being able to work cross-functionally at every company I've ever worked, meeting people where they are and, learning about what their processes are. So when I'm making decisions in my aspect of the business, I can take into account what they're doing and what their needs are and what their constraints are. So that way I get the buy-in, I get the adoption and process much faster. And it's just been a really great, journey thus far.
The great way to approach life, I would say, and especially in the workplace is be inquisitive and ask questions. Right? Anything more to expand on there, or how do you teach others to do so?
I think it's almost like a contagious thing where people, they like to see how things get expanded upon. You ask a question and you start peeling back the onion of, you know, oh, I have an impact in that, or oh, that actually, I have the same problem but in a different lens. And you can, you get 10 people in a room and you start just asking questions and whiteboarding things that come along. It You start to see other people take that approach in different arenas. And I think it's great.
Agreed. So you started out with numbers.
I
How'd that,
love numbers. I
yeah, what,
love
like,
numbers. I wish I could, I wish there was like a magic thing where you could knew like, why you're so passionate about something. And numbers, I think for me, honestly, they're so black and white. There's not gray area. I like things to be the way they're supposed to be. Whether that's some sort of OCD tendency that's just lingering in the background, but numbers, I think it goes back to the inquisitive because I love to solve problems and number problems was really where it started from a very, young age. And you start building out the forensic side of it of like, okay, here's a super long, problem. You're like, all right, now I'm just going to get into it. And it was so exciting. And then you look around like classrooms and people are like sweating and like, faking their own death to get out of, an exam. But I was done in 20 minutes. So I just love numbers and that there's not a lot of interpretation there. There's not a lot of opinion that gets wrapped into numbers there. They kind of are what they are.
so how'd you grow? How did you use that to grow throughout your life and your career? Because there's been I think I mentioned a lot of pivots and it's really interesting. And I'd really love to walk through that with you because
Sure.
I was really drawn to it when I read your story. So,
Yeah, so, I always kind of laugh about this story now. I remember, being in like first, second grade back in school, and everybody takes a giant sheet of paper and you lay it on the floor and you draw an outline of yourself, and they say, okay, now draw yourself as your future career, working in whatever field you could dream of. And all the kids are, police officers and nurses and veterinarians. And I was like in a little suit with a briefcase and a calculator. And, I just remember everybody being like, "Why? That's so boring." And I was like, "Oh, it's so exciting. I love it."
yeah.
So, I've always just had that in the back of my mind, and it was very comforting to know, like, I was always gonna work in finance. I was always gonna be, an accountant or a CPA or something, in numbers and being super confident in that. Walk that path, all the way through school, went to UMass Dartmouth for, accounting, got like 2 years in and started realizing like, "Oh boy, this is pretty boring and redundant." I was doing an internship at a local accounting firm, kinda doing all the mundane tasks of taxes and monthly books and, all the basics of getting, acclimated to accounting. And I was like, "Oh, man, I don't know if I could do this for the next 40 years. This is gonna be brutal." And then I took one course on operations management, and I just remember, like, all the light bulbs going off, even in, like, dark and dreary UMass Dartmouth. If you've ever been on campus, you know exactly what that means.
Mhm.
All the light bulbs went off, and I was like, "Oh, yeah. This is what I need," because you're looking at complex problems that are all surrounded by data. So it's like I made this realization that data is not just 1 plus 1. It's like data in numbers can all kind of go together. And you kind of get there through operations and you take the whole, there's people involved, there's process involved, and everything changes and nothing goes according to plan. And that's where I was like, oh yeah, this is the sweet spot for me. This is where I need to be. I always explain to people like, have you ever played, Madden video games and you're sitting there and you're scrolling through all the plays and you've kind of got all your check downs and all your options. That's what my brain is doing 24/7. So like whenever we're talking about a conversation, I'm constantly thinking about, okay, 4 steps ahead. What if it went this way? Okay, what if we made that decision? So that way I can present like, well, did you consider this? And people are like, how did you even get there? That's like 40 steps from now. I'm like, that's just how
Let
my
me
brain
guess.
works.
You're good at chess. Do you play chess?
Very good. Jeff.
Mm-hmm. Sounds it.
Yeah.
Mhm. So it's awesome. Not a lot of people think like that because people will tend to give their opinion, right, or get creative, but that's not at all what you're talking about. So how did you take that course and then start to chart your way? The operations course, right, operations management, and then how did you start to chart your way from there?
So I started expanding upon, when I stopped working at the accounting firm and I went to go do accounting, but within a manufacturing facility, knowing my personality and that I'm not going to stay in my lane. I'll start teetering off into other segments of the business. And once, the folks there started realizing the value, they allowed me to kind of expand my reach and get into other parts of the business. Um, and I was able to, backfill my role on kind of the accounting side and then start getting into more of, managing the operations and managing, the scheduling and the importing and all the raw material procurement. Um, it was really natural to me where other people were like, oh my God, like you're doing the work of 6 people. So it was, naturally just kind of went into that path.
You just mentioned supply chain, and I think, for our, we haven't had a lot of guests with supply chain management experience. So I think it's awesome that you're with us today. And maybe we could lay down some best practices, or maybe you could share with us some of the things you do so others could learn, like, hey, this is what Katie's doing. Can you kind of walk us through, some of your best practices around it and
Sure.
challenges too?
Yeah, it making the jump into supply chain from operations management back in 2019 was, looking back on it now, probably the wildest time to do it, because I had a very foundational basis knowledge of supply chain procurement. But then taking over that team right before COVID hit, it was just chaos. The company that I'm with now, we manufacture prepared foods. So, everything in my past life was widgets, and they were just, pretty easy to manage. But now in the supply chain that I manage, I'm managing ingredients that have a short shelf life coming in. They have a short shelf life once they're produced. So lining up the complexity of that supply chain when you're procuring globally, and shipping everywhere within the country, it's really, forces you to learn really fast. A lot of it's trial by fire, but every single minute is different. You come in with a list of things you want to do, and 2 hours into the day, you're just firefighting and dealing with all these new things that you couldn't even imagine.
So that's an interesting twist. Like, you have a short shelf life for your product, right? It's not,
Mhm.
it's not a bolt or a wheel or something.
Very
It's
well.
food. So how do you deal with suppliers who are slow with delivery? What happens? What are some of the breaks in the chain here?
Yeah, so and that's really what I would say I pride myself most on, is that I really am about communication. Everything can be solved with communication, because there's so much that can go wrong in supply chain. You'd be a fool to think that everything would go according to the plan that you laid out. So whenever we have an issue with a vendor or supplier or anybody that we're working with, we always just say, it's the communication that we can pivot. We've got four backup plans running in tandem because we expect you to fail. That's how we approach this. So you just need to know when you're hitting that point of failure, so we can start executing plan B, plan C, plan D, and be able to support you so you can get out of your own way and get back together. And when you take that approach with your suppliers and your partners, that we're in this together. You don't want to fail. I don't want you to fail. Talk to me. Tell me what's going on. Let's work through this together. And by doing that, you have to build a lot of contingency plan into your process. And that's really where my strong suit is, and kind of executing that with the team, is that everything you think is going to happen, turn it upside down and then plan for that. So that way you have all these different options ready to pull as soon as, you start seeing something, you start getting that gut feeling. And that's what a lot of people in supply chain, they say you have just this gut feeling that something is going to go one way or the other. And once you start feeling that intuition, you start pulling the levers.
Katie,
And
does that come from your experience, the gut feeling?
I honestly, I think so. It's one of
Think-
those things where you just, when you start networking and you start talking to other people in the supply chain, it's just that you have that edge, you have that, it could be experience, mostly because you don't want to experience bad times again. So you try to remember how you got to that scenario and how do you avoid it going forward, because that's really where you just build it off of tribal knowledge and those scars that you've acquired throughout the years.
So yeah, I like what you said. You don't want to have would you say you don't want the bad thing to happen again? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
You don't want to live through it twice.
No, no, it's painful enough once. So how do you deal with cost escalation?
So for us, our business is super price sensitive because we're selling to the end consumer at the grocery store, and everybody, is paying attention to prices on the shelf. Everybody's really, really attuned to what prices should cost. They're moving their shopping habits to different places based on price points, and you're trying to get ahead of that from the supply chain side of things. So you really have to pay attention to the small incremental costs that will just creep up on you that you don't necessarily consider, where you go out and you put product out to bid and you get a bunch of bids and you land there, and then if you're not holding those vendors accountable and auditing what they're saying and what they're doing, it's like you have all these ancillary costs that will pop up. Oh, you wanted that on a pallet? That's going to be an extra cost. Oh, you wanted us to put that on a truck and get that to you? Oh, that's going to be extra. Um, and you start calling those out. It's much easier to do it if you're taking the approach of auditing them right away versus taking a look back and be like, whoa, why are we losing our shirt on this thing? And you look, you're like, oh, because they said it was going to be this, and now it's 3 times that amount. When your vendors know that you're monitoring and you're watching, they tend to be much more honest and upfront in the beginning, so you can price into your process that way for your sales team. And then from my side, I have the unique perspective of really understanding our manufacturing process. So I understand,
Katie,
where
can
we're
I
going to
stop
have
you for one
challenge.
sec?
Yeah,
Before you jump to the manufacturing process, and it's interesting what you're saying about auditing your vendors. And I was actually surprised to hear, sounds like they can raise their prices without notifying you.
correct.
Yeah, that's a challenge. So how do you audit your vendors? Like maybe talk on the systems and how you built them and who does that and how does it all work?
Yeah, so I'm of the kind of mindset right now where I want everything automated. As businesses really look at, the buzzword of AI, it's like, how are you taking the data that you just have readily available to you in every segment of your business and build out an automated process? So for auditing our vendors, we have built out kind of expected, reporting and then actual reporting. And I have my team monitoring that daily. So if there's expected costs and you have a variance that's, you're not going to be able to go to every single invoice and look at everything. But if you set some parameters around anything above 10% than what we expected, we need to dig into that. Even our own internal freight handling team where they're booking, that we're asking for quotes on freight so we can decide, do we want the vendor to handle the freight? Do we want to handle the freight internally? We'll get a quote and then all of a sudden we'll come back a month later and be like, whoa, why was this double? So it's always challenging what people had, quoted and what you're expecting. So you really have to be diligent about making sure you're tracking what you're expecting to
Mhm.
see and then building out some sort of automated reporting that makes that process much faster. So you're not, sitting there digging through invoices. It's just you're getting an exception report once a week, and those you can go tackle.
Got it. I think you may have just answered this, but maybe there's more to it. Before we jump to manufacturing, what advice would you give other people in your role or teams um, to get ahead of it?
I would say if I could give advice to people is really, it's a mantra that we have around here. It's inspect what you would expect. Um, Always look to see if you're expecting certain results, make sure that's what you're actually getting. And don't go by just the word of, somebody saying, "Yep, that's all set." Yep. No. Find a way to build the check and balance into the process so you're just getting an exception flag, however methodology that works for you to say, there's supply chain, it's so dynamic and it changes every 20 seconds. You need something that you build out your I'm looking for. Oh my gosh, control tower. Building out control towers is really, you don't need some fancy software to do that. You can figure out a way to know that here's the 5 things that are the most critical that I need to check every single day. And these are my barometers. And if any of these start kind of flagging, then I know I got to start digging into that segment of what I'm managing.
Love it. Now, for those who haven't built out a control tower, could you explain it in just a little bit more?
Sure. So a control tower, there's complex software that you can get that will give you a snapshot of the different segments of business that you're looking at, of orders that are due in, orders that have arrived, your spend, your budget. Um, Basically, if there's stuff in transit, you can take a look at where everything is, and if your inbounds are not going to match your demand, what's your secondary plans? But I've seen control towers built out even just in an Excel spreadsheet that have in feeds from an automated run that happens overnight, and live data's feeding in, and it's just kind of telling you, whoa, hold on, something's not right here. Let's go dig into that.
Yeah.
If a segment of the business, like, we've had instances where our forecasting software will hit a glitch overnight. And prior to a lot of these flags that we built out, it could go on for months where a forecast kind of wasn't updated and you're just chugging along buying stuff. And they're like, whoa, we took that forecast out 3 months ago. Why do we have all this inventory? And I'm like, oh my God. So learn from those experiences. And we built in, a nightly check to say, yep, everything ran and everything looks to be what it was the same as yesterday.
Very detailed. I'm very impressed. So you were going to, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes ago, I keep interrupting you. You were going to jump to manufacturing and how you dig into that side of the business too, with the, with the supply chain.
Yeah, so being able to make the connection to manufacturing and the supply chain side of the house, some companies consider the manufacturing process just part of the supply chain. But if you ever worked in a manufacturing company, operations loves to be its own. They are the king of the business, and nothing would happen without operation. But it really, it's a big circle that everybody has to be a part of. And I know that when I'm going out to source new items or certain vendor partners and how reliable they are, I am always have the manufacturing team and the operations team in mind and knowing what their challenges are going to be. Like that pack size isn't going to work for them, or that's going to be really tough to kind of work through when they're the rate that they're trying to process that through every single day. I need a larger pack size for them on this, or that pack size is way too large. They're never going to use that within a day, and we're going to end up throwing half of it out because once you open it, it has to get used. So it's really just trying to put yourself in the mindset of the people that are just doing the work every single day and how this is going to be a challenge for them, and doing what's going out and talking to them, taking time out of your day and going out to the manufacturing floor and just seeing the stuff that you're procuring, go through the process and be like, why are you, that's how you have to process that? That's horrible. Let me work on something different for you. And then you start that feedback loop with people coming to you and saying, hey, is there a better way that we can do this? Do you think this could come in differently? This vendor's just, their paperwork stinks. They're never accurate. And that's the stuff, when you're doing a vendor scorecard, that's the qualitative stuff that you can bring back to your vendor versus saying like, yep, you deliver on time every single time and you're always delivering in full. But if you're creating all this qualitative noise of, it's just really hard for the team to manage, that's what you can bring back to your vendors and challenge them with, because the data is not going to, that's not going to present itself in the data. It's the stories from the people that are doing it every single day that ultimately I think the vendors appreciate because it makes them better, not just for us, but for their other customers.
Hey, Rockstars. If you're tuning into the podcast and are feeling overwhelmed by all the maintenance demands at your facility, don't stress. We've got you covered. Our sponsor, Coludis, is your go to partner to help you tackle all those demands and get them done right, on time, and with top notch quality. From project planning to execution, Coludis is there to make hard work easy. Visit coludis.com today to get started.
I want to jump back to two things you said. It sounds like you have an amazing culture because, some companies won't communicate between departments effectively, and many do, right? But it sounds like you've really, how did you create that?
So I would say Blount has an amazing culture to begin with. That's why I'm here, and I've been here for almost 9 years, and I intend to spend the rest of my career here because the culture is just something that meshes well with me. There's no barriers. Everybody's very accessible all the way up to the C-suite. Um, and that's that culture, that family culture where everybody is in this together. It's something that's foundational, but it takes people, at my level and my peers to start bridging those gaps and going out to the floor and reaching across the table and figuring out what everybody's doing. And that's something that I really try to push because it's the team dynamic, and we all have to be running in the same direction, because if we're running in 40 different directions, it's just everybody's pushing and pulling. So I really try to always think about beyond just the process of pick things up, put them down, move them here. What's the impact of the person doing that, and can we make their day any better, because their job is really hard, and we're asking a lot of them, on 3 shifts, 6 days a week, and just always thinking about the people that are doing the job, is really what I try to push my team and then my cross-functional teams to think about as well.
I absolutely love what you just said. I could think the words were, how can I make their day better or just a little bit better, right? Because their jobs are hard. And you're looking at it through that lens. And that's probably why the culture is so very strong, or one reason why. Great.
For sure.
Um, I also wanted to ask about the vendor scorecard, because this has come up a couple of times, not those words, but kind of giving feedback to vendors. And how does that, I think that could apply to any business. So how did you develop it? How do you implement it, and what cadence?
Yeah, so for vendor scorecarding, we really took a look at what's our most strategic partners, whether that's the most volume that we're doing with them, the most critical as far as, that we have proprietary items with them that if they were to suddenly shut us off, we would not be able to produce. Vendors that we want to grow with that, maybe potentially a decade ago, they were our superstar supplier and they've kind of just drifted off into, maybe not top tier quality. Blount, I would say, that's our number one, mantra is quality. Quality above everything else. That's what keeps customers coming back. That's what we pride ourselves on. So you have to figure out a way to send that message back to your vendors when they're challenging you on, just the quality that they're sending in. It's like, well, that's great if someone else accepts that. We don't accept that. So you're going to have to step your game up. So we really want to find a way of quantifying that for them. So we put together our tiered, approach to our vendors, and rank them all by risk or volume. And then once a year, we go through and we kind of measure different areas as far as quality, reliability, customer service, finance, as far as, how they bill us and our turnaround time. Um, if there's an issue and we need to receive credit from them, how quickly are they process those CAPAs? Um, we go through all of that and we sit with them. We do an internal kind of review, make sure all those different teams that are on the same page, if anybody has anything they want to voice, we kind of get our game plan together. We share that with the vendor annually, and we have an hour-long conversation, whether that's on site or virtually. And we go through every line item, and vendors really are looking for opportunities to improve. It's getting 100 on everything is that's complacency. It's probably like my kryptonite. You can always make things better. So I try to, we don't score them on a 100 scale. It's going to be nearly impossible for you to get 100. And if you are, then, you're going to be my supplier for life at that point. But we also have a bunch of open-ended questions at the end of, what are you doing for innovation? What are you doing for sustainability? What's some things that you can bring from your process and bring it to Blount that maybe isn't even on our radar because you're the subject matter expert in the product that you provide? We're really good at making soup. You're really good at making all the things that make soup. How do we take some of your best practice and weave it into what we're doing? And that's been, a really, really good success of those type of partnerships.
It sounds like your natural curiosity and staying inquisitive wove itself right in there. That's awesome. So thank you, Katie. I want to shift over to mentorship. You and I have talked about, you've been very fortunate to have some great mentors, and now you're doing mentoring for other people. Like you're being one for. So can you, let's open up that topic a little bit.
Yeah. So mentorship, it kind of goes back to, playing on sports and being captains and, having great captains and great coaches. And, when that's your life for the whole, first 20 years of your life, I still craved that, coming into the workforce. I've been so fortunate, the leader that I've had for the last 8 years, she's amazing. She's like the most powerful woman that, you want to work for her because she just gets stuff done. Um, and she's mentored me through, just evolving in my career. And, I'm always the person that's just like pushing through to get stuff done. And if someone's not giving my answer, like I want my answer. So I'm going to find you and get my answer. And that's not always the best approach for everybody. Not everybody, is likes the assertive approach, abrasive approach sometimes. And being a woman, it's harder when you're in manufacturing because you're naturally kind of always just kind of pushed to the back of the line as far as getting answers or getting processes done. And I've never seen it that way. I've always just been kind of one of the guys in every aspect of my life. So it was the same thing coming into manufacturing. But, my leader now, she's been so good at kind of just guiding me in a way that it's much more thoughtful and much more tactful. And it works so much better because, you can take the scenic route and just get people right into where you need them to get you the answers that you need without having to be so pushy. Um, and she's just pushed me to, get out of my comfort zone with some things and have hard conversations that have been, tough because, you develop friendships with people, over working with them, almost a decade. And it's hard to have those hard conversations. And she's guided me through a lot of those. So now, um, I'm moving into, I have a few mentors, both formally and informally. Blount does a great job of, we have a full process here, and platform for you to find a mentor and be a mentor. And they match people up, and it's a really great program that I benefited from early on, and now I really just want to give back to it, and really start to grow those people that have just a raw talent that just needs a little bit of polishing to make them, grow and just accelerate in their career.
That's phenomenal. Can you, you told me a story, one of the times we talked about someone who was in one part of the building or the business and you
Mhm.
saw some raw talent, right? And I think it was questioned, if I'm remembering that correctly, and now they're
Mhm.
flourishing. You walk us through that?
Yeah, of course. So I'm known here at Blount as, a serial poacher. I love
Mm.
to, when I have someone that I work cross-functionally with, whether directly or my team does, and I see that they're reactive and responsive, and they're seeing things before they happen and calling things out. You start to see those skills and you're like, ugh, do I leave them there and I have them as an asset to lean on when I need to? Or do I kind of pull them into the fold and bring them under the procurement umbrella and utilize that talent and grow it and flourish it? So there's one individual who was kind of working in the warehouse environment, but super responsive any day, any time, didn't matter, any crazy request. Also just kind of seeing things in not even in their scope of responsibility and just calling them out and saying, hey, like this is going on. This doesn't seem right. That seems out of place, and just always thinking 5 steps ahead and making things easier. Like, hey, why do we do this the long way? Like I could probably just do it this way and it's much faster. So I had, run the crazy idea of kind of bringing her to the procurement team and on the admin side of the house. And we always talk about the ops and the admin side. And they were like, "Are you sure?" She like works in the warehouse. It's a lot of it's a different environment to bring come into admin, and it's going to take a lot of work, and the computer skills and the software skills. And I said, "You can teach anybody anything. I can teach them any skill set. I can't teach somebody that drive and ambition and passion and attention to detail. That you can't teach. I
I
I would
think
take."
that's the one thing sorry to interrupt you, but the mindset thing, it sounds like that person has an amazing mindset
Yeah.
and drive, obviously.
Oh my god. If I could clone her, I would make 100 of her and we would take over the world, but different story for another day. That's so we brought her onto the admin side when a position opened up, and it was like everything you threw at her, she just found another way to do it. If she didn't know how to do it, you had to show her once, and she kind of took it on and then expanded upon it. She's now since moved on from procurement, and she's in another segment of supply chain, and she's absolutely killing it over there because now she's taken what she knew in the warehouse, what she knew in procurement, and now in her new role, she's just kind of digging into everything and really asking a lot of the good questions of people like, why do we do it that way? That doesn't make any sense. And she's teaching a lot of those kind of old school processes, the faster, more efficient way of doing things. And it's amazing to see that upward mobility for her, and like the sky is the limits, because if she just stays hungry and keeps asking all those questions, she'll just continue. And that's really where, looking at who's doing the hard work, who's dedicated. It's not always the who's here first and who's here last, throughout the day. It's who's actually putting the hard work in and asking the tough questions, and how do you just keep giving them the platform to do that.
Awesome. Incredible. It sounds like you're an amazing mentor. I'm sure you've learned from several, like you already said, too. That's very cool that Blount has a Find a Mentor or Be a Mentor program, or that's what I heard
Yeah.
you say. Right?
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
It's funny. I always tell this story too because it so connects to who I am. So the gentleman that runs the program was, I was coaching with him for a while. So he was coaching me through some of, the early stages of my career. Um, and he had me step back and say, Katie, you want to drive 80 miles an hour all the time, right? I said, yeah, that's how I drive physically. That's how I drive day to day. He's like, that feeling when you get stuck behind a car that's doing 40 and you want to do 80, like that oppressive feeling. I was like, yeah, I get like hot in my neck. Like yes, I know that exact feeling. He's like, that's how you are at work. He's like, you need to find a speed that's not 80, but isn't 40, where you can meet in the middle and still feel like you're leading the pack, but you're not leading them so far ahead that you're just creating all this tension and trying to pull them along. Find a speed that works. It's not going to be 80, I promise you that. And that has stuck with me so much, where it's like you can still lead and you can still be pushing the limits on what we need to do, but you don't need to outrun everybody behind you because you can't bring them up with you.
Oh, like an amazing coach.
Oh my God, he was amazing. I love him.
Yeah. That sounds great. So what's your speed now? Is there a number?
I mean, secretly it's 80. It's always going to be 80. Uh, yeah. But no, I definitely try to, find ways to feed that, where I kind of take on side projects, or I take on different initiatives, or I put a presentation together that no one's really kind of looking at, like, hey, like we could do this at some point. We don't need to do it now, but just keep it on your radar. So it feeds my need to kind of always be doing more and more and more, but not that burnout phase where you're like, okay, I need a break. This is just too much.
Oh. So things don't always go right. There's problems, right? So what's one thing that you faced that, you overcame that could, help people listening, whether it was operations or procurement, supply chain?
So back in my buying days, so one problem that will always kind of stick with me forever is when I was a buyer and I had a category that I was responsible for, and I had entered a purchase order in our system, but I had never sent it to the vendor, and it had a super long lead time. But all of my fail safes and checks and balances in the system, yep, the purchase order's there. We're covered with inventory. There's no, we're all good. And then the day that the purchase order was coming in, I'm like, there's no appointment for delivery here. What's going on? And I ended up going back and seeing that I never sent it to the vendor. So the vendor's just kind of in the dark, like, what's going on here? I don't have your order. Now production is needing this 2 days from now to run production. The
Uh-oh.
vendor's, scrambling. All the things that could go wrong are going wrong. And I'm like, oh my God, like I'm going to get fired. This can't happen to me. So I really had to take a step back and lean on all of the creative minds around here of like, hey, I had to be super humble and say, listen, I messed up. I missed this. Totally my bad. But what are the 5 bat phones I need to use right now and call in all of my favors and all of my help, and get really creative. Like, is there an alternative item that we can use? Is there, something that I can do with this vendor who I've now built a really good relationship over the years, so they can maybe give me this one mulligan on, working around their lead time, working with different partners to move the truck in faster, work with planning to move out the production a couple days to buy us some time. And at that moment, I realized how important it was to have that network of like the people that can fix the things because they're going to go wrong. And really making sure that you've got a strong network of people to lean on, because you're not going to be able to fix everything by yourself as much as you'd love to. You need the favors to call in, which means you need to also have all those good favors in the bank that you can reach out to. So it's supply chain is so all about communication and relationships, and those times, granted it, we delayed the product getting produced for, a couple weeks. The customer was okay with it. The plant pivoted and everybody kind of made it, come together. And I figured out a way to make sure I had a safety net to make sure we didn't miss sending them to the vendor going forward. But that's kind of where it goes into my second thing where I always say it's like, there's no such thing as a one-off. Don't ever tell me in any aspect of this business, oh, that's a one-off. Don't worry about that. No, no, no. That was an opportunity that you just got a window into one of your blind spots, and you just found out that you've got a gap in your process right here. That's not a one-off. That was your golden little ticket right there. Don't let that pass you by. Build a process, build a safety net about that around that one-off, so it doesn't happen again, or it doesn't happen in a slightly different way. So, yeah, don't ever tell me there's a one-off.
Huh.
Probably my other kryptonite.
I love what you said. That's a window into your blind spot. It's not a one-off. So true. Yeah, well done. Thank you very much, by the way, for sharing that, because it's really, that happens to everybody. And, having those, I thought you said, having 5 bat phones that you can call, right? You sowed that net before you needed it. Well done. So you just taught us an absolute ton, right? And I'm sure people want to learn more, so we'll get maybe some contact info from you. But what do you do outside of work? Besides drive 80, right?
So my son is 7 years old and he's a carbon copy of me. So, that's really where I stay my focus between all of his sports and, trying to, feed his inquisitive mind and keep him engaged. Just listening to every single podcast in my, awake time or drifting off time or driving time. I'm a nerd at heart, and I will always be a nerd. So that's kind of where I focus. And of course, my husband puts up with both of us. So
Is he a different, no, not mindset, but different, like, is he like math, or is he always moving at 80 miles an hour or no?
he is a retired police officer. So he's got that type A problem solver, quick thinker personality. So we're either a dynamic duo or we're clashing. So it's a good fit.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, if people did want to get in touch with you, Katie, how would they do so? Because if maybe they wanted to learn a little bit more about what you shared.
Sure. I'm always on LinkedIn, so all of my contact information is there. I'm pretty open and reachable there on LinkedIn. And then you're more than welcome to share out my email address if anybody has any questions or wants to connect.
Awesome. Katie, thank you so much for taking all this time today with us and sharing so much of your journey. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
You as well. Thank you for the time. I really, really appreciate it.
Of course. And for everyone listening, thank you for tuning in. I hope you learned something. If you laughed, tell someone else about the show. And it was another great episode of Facility Rockstars. We'll catch everyone next time.
It's a wrap. Another episode of Facility Rockstars is in the books. Facility Rockstars is sponsored by Colutus, operating the way you operate in order to make your life easier. Until next time, facilitate and rock on.